In debates surrounding the moral status of human life, particularly in the context of abortion and bioethics, a recurring tension emerges between functional and essentialist frameworks. Some pro-life advocates argue that moral worth should not be determined by an entity's functional capacities, such as cognition, sentience, or productivity, but rather by its intrinsic nature or potential. This position often asserts that human dignity begins at conception and remains constant, regardless of developmental stage or ability. However, biological definitions of life are inherently functional. The standard criteria used to determine whether something is alive, such as metabolism, growth, reproduction, response to stimuli, homeostasis, cellular organization, and energy processing, are all based on observable functions. These characteristics form the foundation of how science distinguishes living organisms from non-living matter. This raises a philosophical tension. If life itself is defined by function, can moral status be entirely divorced from functional capacity? Critics of the essentialist view suggest that ignoring functional criteria may lead to inconsistencies, especially when determining the moral relevance of entities that lack key biological or cognitive functions. The debate thus centers on whether moral consideration should be grounded in what an entity is or what it does. Functionalist approaches may prioritize consciousness, viability, or relational capacity, while essentialist perspectives emphasize inherent human status or developmental potential. This distinction continues to shape ethical, legal, and philosophical discourse on personhood, rights, and the boundaries of moral inclusion.
Thesis statement. While some pro-life advocates argue that moral status should not be determined by functional capacity, this position conflicts with the biological definition of life itself, which is inherently functional, revealing a deeper philosophical tension between essentialist and functionalist frameworks for assigning moral worth. Argument structure. Biological definitions are functional by nature. Life is defined through observable functions: metabolism, growth, response to stimuli, reproduction, homeostasis, cellular organization, and energy processing. These criteria are not abstract, they are operational and measurable. Without them, an entity is not considered biologically alive. 2. Essentialist moral reasoning rejects function as a basis for worth. Pro-life arguments often assert that human dignity begins at conception, regardless of functional capacity. This view holds that moral status is intrinsic to being human, not dependent on abilities like consciousness, sentience, or viability. 3. The philosophical tension, function versus essence. If life itself is defined by function, then rejecting function as a basis for moral status creates a contradiction. Essentialist reasoning risks detaching moral worth from the very criteria used to determine whether something is alive. 4 implications for ethical consistency. Functionalist frameworks allow for moral gradation based on capacities, such as sentience and autonomy, which can guide policy on abortion, end-of-life care, and artificial intelligence ethics. Essentialist frameworks may preserve dignity across all stages of human development, but struggle to justify moral boundaries for non-human or non-functioning entities. 5. Conclusion. A coherent ethical framework must reconcile the biological reality of function with the philosophical desire to protect intrinsic human value. This requires either redefining life beyond biology or rethinking how function contributes to moral status.